guys! So today I wanted to talk to you about hourly planning. Hourly planning is something that I have done in a limited way for many years, but over the last couple of years I've started to develop it, and so I just wanted to talk to you about my thoughts on it. So, as many of you know, for many years I used a planner, but in quite a basic way, in that I hadn't really got into the planner community and I didn't devote a lot of time to thinking about the sorts of things that you could do with a planner and all the different potentials that it had. So I usually had a planner with some kind of hourly schedule, so it would run from maybe 8 a.m. until 7 or 8 p.m. or something. I can't remember exactly. And I would just use it to note down appointments, and then any blank space I would write to-dos in. So it wasn't at all systematic. And I would often run out of free space and end up writing to-dos and notes in spaces where appointments should actually go, which was very frustrating. And for some reason it took me 15 years to realize that actually I could get a bigger planner with more room. But when I finally did, the first planner that I got was a Moleskine daily diary, very similar to this one. This was a few years ago now, and this had an hourly schedule. So it was quite natural for me to use an hourly schedule. I think I'd always operated like that. The idea of having a blank space for the day was something that I hadn't had since my very first planner, I think. So, for years I'd had some kind of idea of using an hourly system. And that first year that I had the Moleskine, I continued using the hourly planner in the same way as I had previously, i.e. just to note down appointments and events. It was really only later, when I got my first Hobonichi, which also has an hourly schedule, that I started to experiment with using the hourly layout in more diverse ways. And that's what I want to talk to you about in a minute. So first I'll just tell you my thoughts on different types of hourly layouts. So the Moleskine is what seems to me like quite a standard sort of layout, where it runs from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. This one has a line per half hour, which I think is quite nice. So if you have an appointment at 8 a.m., say, God forbid, in my case, that is just terrible. I hate the idea of anything that early. And then you had something else at 8:30, then you've got space for it. My main problem with this layout is not the amount of space that it gives you per hour. I like having a line per half hour, but the fact that it doesn't go late enough. So it stops at 8 p.m., which I think is based on the traditional assumption that a lot of these planners have, which is that you're using this primarily for work. And, so if you work in an office environment, you'll finish before 8 p.m. and then you go home and you don't have to plan anymore. And that's why a lot of these brands like Moleskine have shared weekends. I think it comes from that same philosophy, and often they don't put any times on the weekend. So for example, this one gives you times for Saturdays, but it doesn't give you times for Sundays. So Sundays you don't need to plan, really. You don't need an hourly schedule, which I find annoying, because you might have just as many things to schedule on Sunday, or you might like to have it for other reasons, like the ones that I'm going to talk about in this video. So anyway, I often found when I was using this planner that I had things that extended beyond the end of the time scale. For example, when I was teaching or taking as a student evening language classes, they would often run from 7 until 9 p.m. So this finishes at 8, and it's like, well, you can't record the last hour of your class, because I would often like to mark the beginning and then the end so that I can see how much of a chunk of the day the lesson or whatever it was represented. And you can't do that if it ends too soon. It's not that I am often out, until midnight or anything, but for something like an evening class or any other kind of evening event, a film maybe, I think it's nice to be able to indicate the end of it, and that's something that you can't do in here. You do get a couple of blank lines at the bottom. This has a weather icon and this has a temperature icon, so you could ignore those or washi over them and write in another hour. But I just think it would be nice if it went a bit further. Which is why I was so immediately drawn to the Hobonichi Cousin when I first saw it, because it has this amazing timeline, which I will show you here. Look how beautiful this is. So it's probably too small for you to see it here, but many of you are familiar with the layout of the hobo. It goes from 6 a.m. until midnight, and when I saw this, I was just like, oh my god, that is the planner for me. That's incredible, because even for me, being a night owl, midnight is enough. I don't have events going past midnight, and even if you did, you've got quite a bit of space here at the bottom, so you could continue this on, in fact, down until like 5 a.m. and then it starts at 6 a.m. so it's perfect. This, like the Moleskine, gives you a line per half hour, which I think is perfect. I really find it frustrating when you only get one line per hour, as some planners do. Some of the Moleskines and the Leuchtturm hourly planner only gives you one line per hour, and I find that really frustrating and can't use it for that reason. Because what if you have an event that only lasts half an hour, or what if you have an event that does last an hour but you need more than one line to write the details, like the address or something. So I really, really love this. For me, this is the ideal timeline. I've heard people say that even this doesn't go long enough because they would like it to start early in the morning or extend until later at night. But like I said, I don't think that's a problem, because you can very easily fill in the remaining hours here in the notes space. There's enough room to do all of that and have a 24-hour schedule. So this is by far my favorite hourly layout. Then I also have an A6 Hobonichi, which is the daily planner. The A5 also has the same layout in the daily pages as well, and I don't use that, and I don't use the one in the A6 either, because this is technically a 24-hour schedule, but in reality, for me, I don't think it works like that, because instead of getting a line per half hour, you get the dreaded line per hour. So I don't know if you can see this, but let's see. There's a dot here, and that represents 4 a.m. Yes, that's 4 a.m. at the top there, so you can't really write anything there unless you write above the grid in the blank space. Then the next dot is 5 a.m., and then the next line after that is 6. And then it goes on like that, so every third hour is written out, and then in between you get 2 dots that represent the hours in the middle. So it goes technically from 5 a.m. until 4 a.m., so you do have the whole 24 hours there. But to me, it's far too small to be able to use as a timeline, unless you just wanted to map out the very broad contours of your day. Let's say from, I don't know, 5 a.m. until 8 a.m. sleeping, and then from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. work, and then home or something. Like, that's all I could imagine being able to do with it, because having the lines be so small and only having an hour per line, to me that just doesn't give enough space to be able to actually map out my day by the hour. So personally, I don't find this at all useful as a timeline, and I just ignore it. I know that there are other people who do use it, so I don't mean to say that it's useless in general for everybody. Obviously it's not, but that's just been my experience with it. I don't find this enough space to be able to plan out my day, especially if I want to use it in the ways that I'm going to talk to you about in the video, for more than just appointments. I guess if you had, say, a doctor's appointment at 3 and that was the only thing that you had to schedule for the day, then it would be fine. But if you really want to use it to map out exactly what you're doing, then I just don't see how for me it doesn't work. So the other way that you can have an hourly schedule is obviously if you create your own. So for example, in this Happy Planner, which I have been using in various different ways since I got it, this doesn't have an hourly spread, but you can put in your own hours, especially if you don't want it to run for the whole day. I think that this would be a bit difficult to use as a full hourly planner, because you'd have to put lines, or that's the only way I could imagine using it, for every hour, let's say, and I'm not sure how many that would give you. I don't think it would give you enough lines to be able to comfortably write in the whole day unless you made them quite small. I'm sure it's possible, but for me it made more sense to use this as a planner just for certain hours of the day. So in this week I made this a planner from 6:30 in the evening until midnight, which was the time that I wanted to focus on. and I just made this 6:30 until 8, 8 till 10, 10 till midnight. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. But that is another way that you could have an hourly planner. If you have a planner that isn't hourly but has enough room that you could divide it into times, then you'd have your hourly planner. So, what are all of these different uses that I think you can do with an hourly planner? So, like I said, the first and most obvious is to mark your appointments, and that is indeed one of the ways that I use this Kaizen. So, if we go back to the hourly spread here, you can the weekly spread, you can see the most basic way that I use it, and I've talked about this in other videos, so many of you probably know this. I use it to block off appointment time. So when I'm teaching, when I have a meeting, when I'm at a conference, anything like that, I will just mark off the time. So I'll circle the hour when it starts. And then something that I really like about this gridded paper in the Hobonichis is that you can very easily indicate how long it's going to take by blocking off the grids up until the next hour. So for example, I'm teaching here for 2 hours, so I just put that little line there, and that shows how long the lesson is, and then I circle the next thing, which in this case happens to be back to back, and it lasts for 1 hour, so I just block off that next hour. And then I've got a class, and so I block off that as well. Normally I will circle when it starts like that. So that's like kind of the obvious way, or to me that's sort of, you know, the first and foremost way that you would use an hourly schedule. And like I said, for a long time it didn't occur to me to do anything more with it than that. But over the last year I have started, or maybe it's been more like 1.5 years now, I started using this in ways that never would have occurred to me earlier. And I think that part of that is because this is such an efficient system with the grids and the long timeline. So what I've started doing, and I've talked about this in some other videos as well, so you might have heard about this, is using this to block off time when I'm at home and when I don't have anything scheduled. And I do it to block off how much time I think a given work task will take me. This, by the way, if you don't already know, this is my work planner, so I only use this for work-related events, although, as I've mentioned, I do indicate some non-work related events if they have an impact on my work schedule, like dentist appointments and stuff like that. So when I'm at home, because I work from home, like say 3 or 4 days a week, depending on the time of year, I might be working on a research project or something that isn't strictly quantifiable in terms of time, so it could take me any amount of time. But I don't want it to take me any amount of time. I want to have a pretty good idea of how long I should be spending on it. Even if I have to revise that later on, I'd like to have an idea, because otherwise I'll just get lost and waste a lot of time because I don't have a clear objective of how long I want to be spending. And it can be very easy, I think, if you're working from home on something kind of amorphous like a research project, to just sort of get stuck and end up, you know, Googling irrelevant things and watching YouTube videos and not realize how much time has gone by. So I'll use this, like this is an example. This was today. I was working on some revisions for an article. So I said I gave myself half an hour for this first thing and then an hour for the second thing. And sometimes it turns out it takes longer, sometimes it takes less time, but having it here tells me this is how long I want to be spending on it, and it gives me an estimate and something to go by, which I think is really helpful as well if you're doing something that you dread or fear that you're not going to be able to get done. You're like, okay, it's manageable. I'm spending half an hour on this and that's it. So I do that for work and I find that really useful, and I could never go back to just using the hourly schedule for meetings, because now I really enjoy being able to map out my time when I'm at home as well. So this is my work planner. What about other things? So usually for other things, I don't worry so much about exactly how long they're going to take, but sometimes it is actually nice to have an idea of how long something is going to take, especially if you have to be somewhere. So this Moleskine is a planner that I bought just because it was so beautiful, and I've had one of these every year for the past few years, and so I just kind of couldn't stand the year starting without having one. And at first I started off decorating it, and I wasn't sure what I was going to use it for, and then I decided to use it to write down the highlights of the day. And after a few days I realized that I just wasn't feeling it for some reason. I'd always had this fear that somehow for me, I really enjoy planning, but I'm not at all good at tracking or memory keeping, so I just wasn't using it. And then I started using it to write down the nice things that I wanted to do the next day. And then as soon as I went back to teaching after the winter break, as you can see, many blank pages. And I was really sad because I had put all this time into decorating it, and also it's a beautiful planner and I didn't want it to go to waste. So I then decided to try using it for what it was intended for, as an hourly planner, to try to map out my schedule when there were specific things that I had to do and I wanted to know how long they would take me. So it's the same principle as the cousin, except that the cousin is only for work, and this would just be for my day overall. So I wouldn't do this all the time because I don't feel like I need to have my whole day scripted out from morning till night in hourly increments. But for example, on Saturday, I was going to the march in central London, and so I wanted to know how long it would take me to do everything that I needed to beforehand and when I would have to leave. So I just wrote down, like, get up, put the laundry on, breakfast, what time I was going to leave, what I was going to do once I'd left, and then what time I wanted to get there. And that was really helpful because, believe it or not, with all of my millions of planners, I don't actually have a planner where, I could just set out my day with times. What about your daily planner, you might ask? So my daily planner is exactly that. It's the planner where I write down all of my to-dos, even the most mundane, from morning until evening, so that I can see my whole day laid out in chronological order. But because of the aforementioned issue with the timeline, and that I don't use the timeline, this still doesn't tell me when to do things. And the reason for that is I think it's probably pretty clear. You can see how many things are listed here. Sometimes there are many more than one things in an hour. If it's something like put away laundry, hang up laundry, clean kitchen, that will all take place in the same hour. And you might say, well, just list it all out on the same line horizontally, which I guess is something that I could do. But for some reason, it doesn't speak to me that way, because there are a lot of hours between, like, say 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., which would be quite full with things. But then from 9 p.m. until 3 or 4 a.m. and then again for the morning hours, there aren't as many things. So I feel like the middle of the page would be really packed with stuff, and then the rest of it would be blank, more or less. So I would rather be able to use this like this and just write down the to-do list and not worry about exactly when each thing is going to happen, because I don't always need to know that. It's not like I think, I have to put the laundry on at 9:27 and then I have to wash the dishes at 9:29. Like, it doesn't need that degree of detail. But on the occasions when I do have to figure out something, it's nice to have it laid out like this. And so I started using it like this. So I used it on Saturday. I didn't use it on Sunday because I didn't need it for that purpose. I was just at home working and I used my work planner for that. And then I used it again today because, again, I needed to be somewhere at a specific time and I wanted to work backwards and see what I had to do from the morning onwards to know that I'd left enough time for myself. So this is not completely necessary. If I didn't happen to have this planner lying around, I probably wouldn't feel like I needed to go out and buy one just for this purpose. But I have to say that since I have it, it's quite useful. It's the sort of thing that I would calculate in my head otherwise, and I've been managing fine like that so far, but I'm kind of curious to see where this experiment goes. It could be that I'll use it occasionally and then forget about it, and it will be one of those planner experiment failures that it's fine because at least I'm using it for now. Or it could be that it will actually become something that I really like and it will become a fixed part of my planner routine, which is how this daily planner got started. I just felt like I didn't have enough room to write down all of my daily tasks from morning until night. And I started using a notebook to do that, and I loved it so much that it became an integral part of my planning routine, and I love it. So I'm not sure because I've only used this twice. I don't know where it will go, but I think this is something that it can be quite nice to have an hourly planner for, is if you just want to get a clear visual idea of what your schedule looks like and try to keep to the times. This is really good. And having something like this where you have every half hour indicated on its own line is really nice, because it does give you enough room to write down multiple things per half hour. So that's another way that I've been using hourly planners. And then finally, this one, if we go back here, when I wrote the times in, the reason that I did this was because, as I mentioned in another video earlier in the year, for some reason, James and I had been finding our evenings getting really complicated and having too much to do in the evenings and it getting too late and it just being very frustrating. So I don't know if anyone else has this evening problem, but I decided that it might be nice just to write down everything that both of us had to do in the evening, so you'd be clear, like, okay, you're making dinner, while you're doing that, I'm doing this, and then this is happening, then I will answer my emails, then we will eat dinner, and then we'll take the dogs out, etc. So we only actually used this for 1 week, because ironically, the following week when I started back at university, look what happened. It got even busier and I was coming home later, and it somehow felt like it was too busy even to make this list. So this was a short-lived experiment, but it's possible that it will come back again, because in the week when we were using it, it was actually quite helpful. So the difference between this and this one is that this one just had my own individual things that I had to do, whereas this was a joint list for both of us that we could both look at and kind of apportion different tasks to each one of us during the evening, and it's specifically for the evening. And it works quite well because the Happy Planner is reasonably big. This is the classic size, but it's bigger than A5, so you have lots of space to see everything. And I put these to-do checklists in from the Mambi sticker book, so it's like kind of nice big writing, easy to look at, and we would just like tick, tick, tick. And we had these 2-hour blocks, so we would say like, okay, between, well, this is actually an hour and a half, between 6:30 and 8, we think this is a reasonable amount of things to get done, and then between 8 and 10, this is what we want to do, and then afterwards between 10 and 12 we want to do these things, and with the aim of not getting to bed too late, which is a perennial challenge. So these are just some of the ways that I think being a planner addict and having tons of planners has made me start to think about experimenting using hourly planning for, which I never would have previously. And it's perfectly possible to get by without any of these things, but I think that a combination of these different types of hourly schedules can actually be quite helpful and useful in different ways, whether it's for work or personal things. If you just have a particularly busy day and you want to know realistically how much will you actually be able to get done, I think that an hourly planner really has a lot of potential, where just writing a list of things might not be as helpful, because you might write this whole list of to-dos and actually realistically you can't get them done in the day, but unless you see them all written out in front of you and you see how much you can fit in, you might not know that, and then you might like kind of, you know, end up being disappointed because you didn't get through this whole list. Whereas if you can map out exactly how long it will take, it can help a bit more to get an idea of how much you can realistically do in that time. So it's also obviously just an excuse to experiment with different planner layouts, which is also fun. So I hope that you enjoyed this. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll be back again soon. Bye.